From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Mathieu, coming to you with some developing news tonight from the White House.
Happening as we speak, Republican senators sitting down with President Trump, discussing his one big beautiful bill, capping off a day of whiplash headlines, putting Washington and Wall Street at an inflection point.
Elon Musk tonight doubling down on his opposition to the bill, urging his 220 million Twitter followers to call their senators and congressmen, writing emphatically, kill the bill.
The tweet coming only hours after the Speaker of the House said he flatly disagreed with Musk. And after the Congressional Budget Office projected $2.4 trillion could be added to the deficit as a result of the mega bill.
Now, one by one, lawmakers like Marjorie Taylor Greene are stepping up against the legislation. Why? Because they never read the full bill and its various provisions. Joining us now with the latest as those Republican senators continue to meet with the president as we speak. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson covering things on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Erik, what's the latest?
You know, I think the CBO score really was an interesting mixed bag here. $2.4 trillion in deficit increases. 11 million people would lose health insurance. That's certainly a major talking point for Democrats attacking this bill. On the other hand, CBO released a separate score saying if Trump's tariffs were in place for 10 years, that could raise $2.8 trillion in revenue. Republicans are out there saying that this will help pay for the bill. Of course, that assumes they remain in place for 10 years. Trump himself has said they're a negotiating tactic and would go away. So interesting on that front. On the wider political front, Elon Musk is really doubling down his attacks on this bill. Republican senators are showing a strong, brave face in the wake of that. Kevin Cramer of North Dakota saying if Elon Musk was going to tell me how to go to the moon, I would listen, but he doesn't get a vote. They're basically saying, you know, they are serious policymakers. They're going to make their own decision whether or not Elon Musk issues threats or threatens to spend money to primary them or not.
So let's talk about the decisions that could be being made as we speak inside the White House, Erik, as the majority leader has suggested there may need to be some adjustments to the SALT cap, for example. But the Senate Finance Committee members who are sitting down with the president right now aren't just in charge of changing tax policy, but potentially Medicaid as well. What could realistically emerge here?
You know, the big goal of Leader Thune in the Senate is to expand the temporary business tax breaks that expire after 5 years in the House bill. This is, on depreciation, interest expensing. That will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. So they may need to find additional savings in places like Medicaid. There was even talk in Senate lunch about looking at waste, fraud, and abuse, as it's called, in Medicare, which would be, sort of a third rail potential topic. So there's an ongoing conversation about that. But on the SALT cap itself, there's a real sense among Senate Republicans they're going to reduce that $40,000 SALT cap that was in the House bill, sort of a necessary item to get 4 key swing district Republicans on board. But those Republicans themselves are telling our reporters this is going to cause a massive problem for them, and they will kill the bill in the House. So we'll see if they actually tweak the cap itself or find some other workaround, perhaps an income limit to sort of satisfy and create a compromise there. But there are going to be tweaks. We're expecting a new draft of the tax provision at the end of next week.
All right, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson live on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much. And today on the early edition of Balance of Power, we spoke with someone else on Capitol Hill, Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, and asked him what he needs to see in the bill to vote yes.
If we don't get this done, Americans are looking at a north of $4 trillion tax increase. I was talking with Kevin Hassett at the White House yesterday. His projections are that would yield a 6% decrease in our nation's GDP. That would be terrible for America, frankly, be terrible for the world economy. We can't let that happen. The main interest I have is making certain that we stimulate more capital investment in America, because more capital investment will beget more jobs, more economic activity. This will have a very positive impact on the economy. And frankly, it's something that the Congressional Budget Office completely misses in their analysis. They missed it at an incredible level back after the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were passed. In fact, they missed it by north of $1 trillion worth of revenues. So I think that my colleagues need to certainly take into account the fact that this is a pro-growth bill. This tax package is going to stimulate more economic activity here in America. We will see growth that's not captured in these CBO estimates, but will have a material impact on our economy, on our well-being, and frankly, in terms of going the right direction to reducing the deficit.
Well, Senator, we've got a lot of questions about what's inside, and it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. You mentioned the CBO, so I do have to ask you about that. Two big headlines today coming out of the Congressional Budget Office. First, the Republican tax bill that cleared the House, they say, would add $2.4 trillion to U.S. deficits. But that same Congressional Budget Office, which I know Republicans criticize a lot, is now projecting the Trump tariffs will cut the budget gap by $2.8 trillion. Do you buy that number? And if so, is this bill paid for?
Well, in the first case, what they do is static analysis. They don't take into account the dynamic of investment in the economy that will yield growth. So I think that's patently wrong. And the second, with regard to tariff revenue, it's possible, but we're not nearly to the end of our trade negotiations.
You can find the full conversation with Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee online or on the terminal, as we now hear from the other side of the aisle on balance of power and bring in Democratic Senator Peter Welch of Vermont. He's a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and it's great to have you back, Senator, on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'd like to start with the CBO, since we were just talking to Senator Hagerty about that. It is quite the dual headline today. The tax bill would add $2.4 trillion to U.S. deficits, but at the same time, the CBO is estimating that Donald Trump's tariffs could cut the budget gap by even more, $2.8 trillion. So will tariffs pay for the tax cuts?
No, I mean, I actually see it exactly the opposite way. It's $5.2 trillion that is essentially going to be added to the deficit. Here's how, okay? The CBO says it's a $2.4 trillion deficit buster right now. The tariffs, the question on tariffs is who pays? Are those paid by foreign governments? That's essentially what President Trump is asserting. But when I talk to folks, farmers, they're paying 25% more for their fertilizer. When I talk to steel manufacturers that use steel, they're paying 50% more. So that revenue is a tax that's paid by our businesses and by our consumers. And you're seeing the president trying to shield that by telling Walmart to eat it. They're not going to do it any more than any other supplier can. So that's really bogus. Everybody knows we're going to pay those tariffs.
Well, as we consider the way in which tariffs, Senator, factor into this revenue picture, knowing there could be revenue lost as a result of these tax cuts, it is worth noting that taxes are not the only thing in this one big, beautiful bill. It also is intended to raise the debt ceiling by $4 trillion, at least the version that passed the House. And President Trump today suggested the debt ceiling should be abolished entirely, actually saying he agrees with your colleague, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, who we spoke with about that earlier today. This was her live reaction, sir. Let's listen together.
I think that Donald Trump and hey, listen, I'm ready to join up with him and make that happen. We need to get rid of the debt ceiling altogether, not extend it, not say, ooh, while this is going on, this budget negotiation, let's just roll out a few $1 trillion more in the debt ceiling. Nope. That has gotten us into trouble before. It continues to get us into trouble. Donald Trump is right. Let's get rid of it altogether.
Is this an effort you, too, would sign on to, Senator?
You know, I think the debt ceiling is a bit of a sideshow here at this moment. The question really, with or without the debt ceiling, should we be raising the debt by $2.4 trillion when we're going to pay for that by kicking 16 million people off of health care on the Medicare program, where we're going to make folks who are on the Affordable Care Act lose it because they won't be able to afford it, when families that depend on nutrition benefits in the SNAP program are going to lose that. So, you know, what I see here with the economic policy of Trump is, one, tax cuts that are not going to be pro-growth. I do disagree with Senator Hagerty. Two, a deficit that is going to result in higher interest rates. It means higher car payments for folks, higher cost of mortgages, and of course, any businesses that want to borrow money are going to pay more. So what I'm concerned about is not the policy of the debt ceiling. I'm concerned about the policy of fiscal policy of increasing the debt that's going to increase our interest rates and doesn't go into any productive pro-growth activities.
Senator, I know you're joining forces with the aforementioned Elizabeth Warren on an inquiry into Republicans' effort to use something called the current policy baseline. Our audience here on Bloomberg is pretty familiar with it at this point. And it essentially sets the baseline for this entire construct when it comes to how to pay for these tax cuts. You're arguing it amounts to magic math and a sleight of hand. This was back in February when the inquiry was launched. What have you come up with?
Right. This is a political debate where the proponents of the tax cut are trying to make it appear as though it's not going to result in a deficit by doing essentially magic accounting. I mean, the bottom line here is we should have an on-the-level debate. The CBO says this will add $2.4 trillion to the deficit. So the question is it worth it? What are we going to get out of it? Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? That's really the heart of this question.
Well, as we consider the CBO score, not just of this bill, but what you were speaking about a moment ago, Senator, they're scoring on tariffs as well, who ultimately will bear the cost of them. I would like to ask you, given you were just part of a congressional delegation to Canada over the Memorial Day recess, about Canada in particular. As earlier today, we spoke with Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, and this is what she had to say about the prospects of trade negotiations going well between our two countries.
In Canada, there's optimism. I just this week met with my counterparts, the 13 premiers, as well as the federal prime minister. And because we've got G7 taking place in the coming weeks in my home province of Alberta, in Kananaskis, I think that everybody's hopeful that it would be really nice either just before or during or just after to announce that there has been some kind of détente or interim step towards getting to a comprehensive renegotiation of trade.
Senator, did you leave your trip to Canada feeling like they are ready to make a deal? And do you think the same of the Trump administration?
Well, the tone that I just heard is the tone I heard there. They regard themselves as our closest allies, and I regard us as their closest ally, especially those of us like Kevin Cramer of North Dakota on the border, me, Vermont, Senator Shaheen on the border. But the reality is there was really significant heartburn on the part of Canadians with the 51st state discussion, the governor of Canada discussion. And what is happening right now is our farmers, like in Vermont, they're paying 25% more for their fertilizer. And they're tight margins, they can't make it. Our tourism is collapsing with the Canadians. Senator Shaheen mentioned that the manufactured products that used to be going to Canada from New Hampshire are really way down. So the real world impact of these tariffs is affecting business. The other thing that's really problematic is the president has changed his tariff policy 22 times already. And what I hear from businesses, we were down at Orvis in southern Vermont, there's no way they can plan with this constant situation up and down. The business folks wake up and they look at the news or they try to find from whatever source they can, what are our tariffs today? And folks who have products coming in on a boat, they don't know whether to accept delivery because of the ever-changing nature of these tariffs. So the chaos is really tough.
Well, if in fact we are on track to some progress here, Senator, just to get back to the question, is there any chance you could see the framework of a deal or something more robust around the G7 in the weeks ahead?
You know, the reality is none of us know. You know, I know as much as you know. So we ask somebody and we get the latest information. We read what's on the news and what's on the blurs. But the fact is there's been no coherent policy that has been sustainable. That's the constant changing. So in truth, none of us know. And it's not as important that I know. It's really important that a farmer knows. What are they going to pay for fertilizer? It really is important what a manufacturer knows what they're going to have to pay for steel or aluminum. And stability is so essential. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican business that might have voted for President Trump or you're a business where you voted for Harris. The bipartisan nature of this policy is to inflict pain on everyone.
All right, Senator, we appreciate you joining us. Democratic Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, thank you for your time. And we still have a conversation with the senator's Republican colleague on the Finance Committee, Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, coming up live from the White House following the ongoing meeting with the president. But up next, President Trump's call with Vladimir Putin, the retaliatory strike that Putin vowed to carry out, and more as a potential ceasefire deal moves further out of reach. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kailey, Leinz. I'm Mathieu. Thanks for joining us. The U.S. is now refusing to provide air defenses to back the reassurance force the U.K. and France are planning for a post-war Ukraine. That, according to people familiar with the matter, seen as a major step back at a time when world leaders are insisting on the U.S.'s role in deterring Russia in the future. And it comes as Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump spoke on the state of the war just hours ago. For more, we go to Bloomberg's Natalia Droziak. Natalia, it's great to see you. How much expectation was there that this administration would go along with this plan to begin with?
Well, that's true. I mean, they were always keeping their cards close to the chest, but I think the allies had hoped that, even if there isn't anything formalized or very public, that there would be some form of support. And now the Brits and the French are just, they've been convinced that this is not going to happen at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we look at what else the president told us about his conversation with Vladimir Putin, he doesn't mention air defenses coming up, at least the role that the U.S. would play, other than to say that Putin expressed to him very strongly that Russia will be responding for the aerial attack, drone attack that Ukraine conducted deep inside Russia. Do we have a sense, Natalia, of what that response is likely to look at, and if the president is actually encouraging Russia to hold back? Because the Truth Social post doesn't suggest that.
Exactly. I think that's what struck me the most from what Trump said, was that he was broadcasting Putin's plans, but without condemning them in any way. And that's a big shift from what we've seen even from Trump himself just a few weeks ago, threatening sanctions on Russia, calling for a ceasefire. And we didn't see any of that today. So when I look at that post, I think this is just another example of, the U.S. walking away from this process to some degree and prioritizing other areas. We saw him mentioning Iran in that post.
All right, Bloomberg's Natalia Droziak, thank you so much for joining us. And we want to get more on this now with retired General Ben Hodges, former commanding general for U.S. Army Europe and now senior advisor for Human Rights First. General, welcome back to Bloomberg. As we think about, as we were just discussing with Natalia, the things the president did not say in his readout of his conversation with Vladimir Putin, does a Russian response to Ukraine's attack have to be inevitable? Do you think there's realistically anything here that the U.S. or anyone could do to manipulate Vladimir Putin's response to something like that?
Well, first, I agree with Natalia's assessment and the things she pointed out. I think this embarrassing Truth Social post confirms for anybody that still was wondering that the Trump administration has zero interest in doing anything to put pressure on Russia to help Ukraine or to get to some kind of sustainable peace. I mean, it was too hard for them. Their approach was doomed to failure from the very beginning because they never appreciated or cared about the cause of the war, the fact that Russia's the aggressor, the culture, the geography, why the Ukrainians were fighting. And so the Kremlin can see that as clearly as anybody else. And so they mock the president. They have zero respect for this administration. So there's nothing now that Trump could do or say, I think, that would change Russian perception unless maybe he was to support the sanctions bill that Senators Blumenthal and Graham have put together.
Mm-hmm. Well, you wonder what the response, General, could be from Russia, knowing that Ukraine was already responding to what was one of the biggest drone attacks of the war against civilian targets, by the way. We've been asking a lot of experts about this over the course of the week, the odds, the expectations that you might have that Vladimir Putin would use a nuclear weapon.
So I'm glad you pointed this out. The largest drone attack of the war happened before Ukraine's amazing drone strike against these Russian bombers. But this is a war that's been going on 11 years. So we're so far past the point where somebody has a justified retaliatory strike or something like that. We are 11 years into this war. And Ukraine, of course, did what they did as a way, what we would call killing the archer instead of trying to intercept all the arrows. Where these attacks are coming from, and it's Kinzhal cruise missiles being launched by Russian bombers. But your question about a nuclear option by the Russians, of course you have to take it serious because they have thousands of nuclear weapons. They don't care how many innocent people get killed, including perhaps even some of their own. But I think there is zero chance they use a nuclear weapon because there's no benefit for them. I mean, there's no benefit. Nothing good happens for Russia if they use a tactical nuclear weapon. The best thing for them is when they threaten nuclear weapons, because they saw that the Biden administration and now the Trump administration react to these threats. The Chinese, this would be a problem for the Chinese. I think they would be extremely unhappy if Russia were to do this. And so I think I just don't see Russia doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to return, General, to something you just brought up, the topic of sanctions. As we asked retired General Wesley Clark, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, about the prospect of harsher sanctions and what that really would accomplish in terms of efficacy. This is what he told us last night.
These countries are going to put up with the economic hardship and continue to support Russia until the United States really puts its foot down. But sanctions are not really the way of putting the foot down. All the rhetoric, so I'm disappointed in Vlad, please stop, and all that stuff, that's for domestic consumption. What makes a difference in international affairs is action. That action is sanctions, number one, and additional armaments to Ukraine, number two. And number three, no more talk of redeploying forces out of Europe.
And I wonder, General, if you agree with that assessment, that even harsher, the harshest potentially of sanctions are not enough alone.
Well, I do agree with most of what General Clark just said, except the sanctions that the Graham-Blumenthal package are talking about are sanctions on customers, people that are willing to buy Russian oil and gas. Of course, that's China and India. Which is where 70% of Russia's oil and gas goes to. I think the point is the Kremlin is not going to change their approach, regardless of the fact that there are almost 1 million casualties in this war. It's going to be when Putin realizes he cannot win. And until the West demonstrates that we are willing to do the hard work of economic pressure, stopping their use of these illegal shadow fleet vessels in the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, manipulating the market to get the prices down, and then these sanctions that would be on customers of Russian oil and gas, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And certainly we should be providing unlimited weapons, ammunition, no restrictions to Ukraine, because it's in our interest that Ukraine is successful. And the Europeans can see, and Canada can see that the U.S., this administration is really not going to do anything. So they're going to have to do it themselves, I think.
Yeah.
General, we've only got 1 minute left. The Chancellor of Germany is in the Oval Office tomorrow. Should he prepare for an ambush?
I think Mr. Merz is sage enough to know what the possibilities are. But, he's a big, tall guy. He's a very successful businessman, really successful businessman. And he's got a good news story to deliver, that Germany is significantly increasing their defense spending. And this is a chance for Germany to lead by example. And I think he'll be very confident when he goes in there.
It's great to have you back. Retired General Ben Hodges, former commanding general for U.S. Army Europe, now senior advisor for human rights. First, we thank you, as always, General, for the insights. Coming up, the latest step the administration just took against elite universities, this time targeting Columbia. But up next, Republican senators meeting with the president as we speak. We're going to turn to how Senate Republicans are working to push through President Trump's tax bill with our political panel. They're coming up next. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kailey, Leinz. I'm Joe Mathieu. Private sector payrolls increased by 37,000 last month, marking the slowest pace in 2 years, lower than all estimates in a Bloomberg survey of economists. Despite the slowdown, pay gains remained robust, with workers who changed jobs seeing a 7% increase in pay, those who stayed put seeing a 4.5% gain. On the data, President Trump taking to Truth Social once again today, saying that the too late Powell should cut interest rates. This comes now as some Republican senators meet with the president inside the White House, and we've got our eyes on the West Wing for you for when they emerge. And there is more news coming out of the administration today involving its war with elite universities, this time taking on Columbia University. And joining us now with the latest on this, Bloomberg White House reporter Akayla Gardner. Akayla, thanks for being here. The Education Department says Columbia University no longer meets accreditation standards. How come?
Well, to specify here, the Education Department notified Columbia University's accreditor that they do not believe that Columbia meets their standards for accreditation. The administration does not have the power to pull Columbia's accreditation, but they're basically asking this entity to reconsider it. And this really is all stemming from their concerns about anti-Semitism on campus and the protests that we've seen over the war in Gaza. But this really represents a significant shift from what has been the narrative from President Trump, from Secretary McNabb, that conversations with Columbia were going in the right direction. We have seen the secretary and the president have direct conversations in the last couple of weeks here, and this suggests an escalation, certainly, in the negotiations between them.
And we're just hearing right now, Akayla, from Columbia, which says it's deeply committed to combating anti-Semitism on campus, continuing to work with the government to address that issue, saying it is an issue that they take seriously. But to the point you were just making, Columbia, unlike Harvard, was one that decided they wanted to acquiesce to some of the administration's requests when it was threatened that funding would be pulled. Are we to assume that kind of trying to make those deals isn't always necessarily going to be enough to protect these higher educational institutions?
Well, it certainly seems that Columbia is taking this approach of sort of a more moderate approach when it comes to negotiating with the administration. But I think what's been a really key point of tension here is we have seen Columbia push back on some of these issues of academic freedom that they call it. Harvard, that is exactly why they're pushing so hard against the administration, because they believe that they are trying to control their faculty, the viewpoints of their students, by raising this concern of viewpoint discrimination, with the administration essentially saying that these schools are too liberal and they do not represent some of the ideals that really drive President Trump's movement of conservatism and really those ideologies here. And so it certainly seems that Columbia is going to continue to try to create those conversations behind closed door, even as Harvard now has 2 lawsuits against the administration.
All right, Bloomberg's Akayla Gardner, thank you so much. And for more, we turn now to this evening's political panel. Megan Hayes is with us, former special assistant to President Biden and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership, both with us here in our Washington, D.C. studio. But we're, of course, focused at this hour on what's happening, a mile away, Joe, at the White House, because the meeting is still underway between President Trump, the Majority Leader of the Senate, John Thune, and members of the Senate Finance Committee. Sarah, they're going to be talking about the tax bill, obviously. Are you expecting that substantive changes to what the House was able to pass narrowly might emerge from this meeting at the White House?
I think they're going to have to tweak it. I don't see substantial, because if they do substantial, it has to come back to the House, and it will not get through the House. So they're going to have to make some tweaks that the senators can live with. I think that's why President Trump has them there. Some of my members of the Republican Main Street Partnership are there. So I'll get updated later on that. But they can't make huge changes. I mean, we passed it by 1 vote in the House.
One of the people in the room is Ron Johnson, who says he's a no vote unless there's much more significant cutting here and much less addition to the deficit. He's even calling to break it in 2. You went through Build Back Better. You've been through reconciliation before. How many different iterations could we see here, or are we actually getting to a final product?
Ironic that they have similar initials in BBB here. It's very confusing for us who lived it before. I think that there could be several iterations, right? I think that the new CBO score, the Congressional Budget Office, came out. They're still adding $2.7 trillion to the deficit. That's going to be a non-starter for some of these Republicans. But just like we were mentioning, the House won't vote for it. And there's even members who are now saying they wouldn't have voted for it with some of the provisions that they have now read that are in it. So it might not have passed originally. So I do think that this is really problematic for the Republicans. I think that the Democrats have been really, really steadfast here and really have banded together. They are not going to vote for this in any way, shape, or form if there were cuts to Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, with still giving tax cuts to the top 1%.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm wondering if it's not just Democrats to watch here, but Elon Musk has been very active in this conversation over the last 24 hours. His tweet today, call your senator, call your congressman. Bankrupting America is not okay. Kill the bill, he says. Megyn, is Elon Musk suddenly Democrats' best friend on this issue?
I mean, it's unclear if this is self-motivated because the EV cuts were cut in the House. So it's, but I think that Democrats will take anyone who is on their side of not cutting these 18 million people off of Medicaid and 14 million people off of Medicaid and 18 million kids losing food assistance. So I think that Democrats will take the help here, but I'm not sure that his motivation isn't more personal than political here.
Is that what we're talking about here? That's the refrain from Republicans, the EVs. But we heard from President Trump, he said Elon Musk never talked to me about it, never asked me about it. What's the change of heart all about?
I do think it's personal for Elon Musk because I do understand that he did not express any concerns about this. The members were at the townhouse last night. Yeah. There was no discussion that Elon Musk had any problems. He did not call any of them. And now all of a sudden he does. So, welcome to D.C.
Right. Some would suggest, though, you come to D.C., you get a look under the hood, and maybe you respond like Elon Musk did. Did he see too much while he was here?
He might have. And Elon Musk, he does have a set of agenda for himself. Yeah. And he got hurt in this bill. Let's call it what it is. So now he's trying to get the senators to put the provisions that hurt him back into the bill. So, welcome to politics here in D.C.
Well, yeah, and speaking of politics, there's been a lot made of the politics of the what's supposed to be nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, specifically by Republicans who have said it doesn't use dynamic scoring. You can't trust the way they've scored this tax bill. But they also scored Trump's tariffs as of May 13th, at least, where those stand now, Megyn, and found that actually those tariffs reduce the deficit by $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years, which could pay for the deficit impact they're saying cutting taxes could bring. Is that actually proof that this administration's policy, that you have to view all of this as kind of one big economic policy equation rather than viewing it in separate parts, is justified?
Sure, but I still think that having these tariffs and having an unstable economy and unstable markets is not good long term. It's definitely not good for the middle class, and I think that's where Democrats are focused, is making sure that the middle class the costs are lower for them.
You mentioned a couple of members of the Republican conference in the House fallen off the wagon here with concerns about items they found having continued to read the bill. And Sarah, I'm curious your thought on this. Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't like something about AI regulations.
Is that a surprise?
Well, listen, maybe not, but to see Mike Flood, Republican from Nebraska, said he hadn't read the section that would make it harder for judges to hold officials in contempt of court. Do we just have a much bigger problem here, dropping 1,000-page bills, and lawmakers don't have enough time to read it?
So Mike Flood, for full disclosure, runs the Republican Main Street Caucus with Dusty Johnson. They did not see this. They were at the House the Wednesday before the Thursday morning vote. They did not see that provision.
You had a big group read?
We did.
Yeah.
We did. They were there. They were talking. They were negotiating.
This is the danger of moving too fast, no?
It is. It is a danger of that. Absolutely. That will come out in the Senate. As Congressman Flood said, he's already called his senators like, listen, we have to remove that. But the overall bill, most people did know, 99% that was in it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I can't speak for what she did or didn't know.
Not a member of the...
I think it's also the problem with doing things in the middle of the night, too, right? They did these hearings in the middle of the night, so people weren't aware of it and people were sleeping. And the American people were sleeping. So I think that maybe we should go back to legislating during business hours and during the daytime might be more effective, and people can't say that they didn't read the bill. But this has also been a problem, to be fair. This has always been a problem, and they need to have a solve for it.
This is a bipartisan problem.
Exactly. 100%. They drop bills that are too long. People don't have enough time to read. And that is unacceptable. That is not serving anyone's constituents.
Just imagine the staffers feeding the AI models to read what the heck is in there,
Totally.
Right?
Or the sleepy members who would agree with Megyn on the business hours thing as they struggle to stay awake in the chamber and miss the vote.
The vote. Exactly.
One other thing I want to ask about it, we're looking to see if more detail on this will emerge from the meeting, Sarah, is changes to the SALT cap specifically, because Senator Thune says there will have to be adjustments on that. Is anything short of 40,000 threatening not only the passage of the bill in the House a second time, but potentially the Republicans' majority being held?
Absolutely, because New York, New Jersey, and California, the most affected by this, they are the majority makers. They're holding strong. I think Senator Thune needs to go and talk to the caucus, which is made up of all the Main Street members in those 3 states, and talk with them about, okay, what can you live with? 40,000 was kind of their break point. They actually wanted more. Maybe they can go down a little bit, but I don't see a lot of room for negotiation here.
I wonder if we find that number out sooner than later as senators emerge from this meeting. Great conversation with Sarah Chamberlain and Megan Hayes. Thank you so much both for your time. To some other big news that we're following today in Washington, the Department of Health and Human Services announcing its plan to rescind 2022 federal guidance to healthcare providers, requiring that people have access to an abortion in the event of a medical emergency, even if their state restricts the procedure. HHS saying the guidance from the Biden administration does not, quote, reflect the policy, unquote, of the current administration.
And in another part of the administration, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ordered the Navy to rename the USNS Harvey Milk, a highly rare move that will strip the ship of the moniker of a slain gay rights activist who served as a sailor during the Korean War. The change was laid out in an internal memo that officials said defended the action as a move to align with President Donald Trump and Hegseth's objectives to reestablish the warrior culture.
Also today, the air quality in the northern U.S. is reaching dangerous levels, with 12 states now issuing safety advisories and alerts as wildfire smoke from the more than 100 blazes burning in Canada drifts into the region. We spoke earlier today with Canadian Premier Danielle Smith about the situation on the early edition of Balance of Power. Here's what she said.
I think we have to be realistic about the incredible volume of forestry that we have and how old it is. And so that does require the proactive approach, that you either can do prescribed burns so that you can control it, or you do mechanical removal so that you can take away the fuel, or nature will take its course.
Coming up, we'll turn back to the conversation on how Senate Republicans are working to push through President Trump's tax bill with someone who was just in that meeting at the White House. Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas will join us next with news on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Mathieu, I'm Kailey Leinz, live in Washington. We're still watching the White House, a meeting between President Trump and Senate Republicans still ongoing on the tax bill. But the Senate also could act as soon as this evening or later this week on a confirmation vote of Mickey Bowman to be the Fed's new vice chair of supervision, something that could come just a day after the Federal Reserve finally lifted the asset cap on Wells Fargo that has had its growth limited for years as a result of what regulators saw as bad behavior. And earlier today, on the early edition of Balance of Power, we had the chance to speak with the ranking member of the Banking Committee in the Senate, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, about that. Here's a piece of our conversation.
Understand this about Wells Fargo. I think before you decide to lift this big penalty that's been in place for Wells Fargo for 7 years now, you should ask for maybe 1 year in which they aren't caught breaking the law. Remember that in January of this year, the SEC tagged Wells Fargo for cheating investors. In December, the CFPB tagged Wells Fargo for cheating American consumers, by the way, to the tune of over $800 million. And in September, the OCC tagged Wells Fargo for money laundering. So we have the 3 big banking regulators all saying Wells Fargo's out there still breaking the law. And then a report just a few weeks ago by former and current Wells Fargo employees saying that the very activities that Wells Fargo engaged in 7 years ago, where they created fake accounts for people and so on because they were pressing their employees to get those numbers in, to get more people signed up for more accounts, that same activity is occurring today. And those are the circumstances under which the Fed unanimously says, hey, Wells Fargo, get on out of here. You don't need any extra regulation. No, that just doesn't wash.
Do you see any potential benefit here, Senator, though, of Wells Fargo being able to better compete with other big banks for the competitive landscape to change in that way?
Look, I'm all for competition, but I don't think that cheaters ought to have a leg up in competing. And that's really the part to remember here about Wells Fargo. The reason we want to have good enforcement of all of the banking laws is that the banks that actually follow the law, the banks that aren't engaged in money laundering or the banks that are not cheating their investors, that those banks ought to be able to play on a level playing field. And Wells Fargo, we know starting 7 years ago, that Wells Fargo was so boosting its profits and, by the way, its CEO compensation based on cheating American customers. And in fact, it was so awful what they did that it wasn't just civil penalties, they were in violation of criminal laws. So the idea that, boy, we want to get them right back out there competing with the other banks at a time when their own employees are saying, hey, they're back to doing the stuff they were doing before. That's not the direction we want to go.
Senator Elizabeth Warren live with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm going to ask you to walk with me here for a second, Senator, because I don't know if Donald Trump is watching us right now, but the president is posting about you right now, just on Truth Social. Donald Trump writes, quote, I am very pleased to announce that after all these years, I agree with Senator Elizabeth Warren on something. The debt limit should be entirely scrapped to prevent an economic catastrophe. He's reposting you here where you suggest as much. This is less than 24 hours after Elon Musk said shame on Republicans who passed the reconciliation bill in the House. You're finding yourself within a 24-hour period agreeing with Donald Trump and Elon Musk. What's going on around here?
Well, look, I think on the debt ceiling, I've been on this for many, many years. The debt ceiling is just something that's been used as leverage in negotiations. The United States should never, never threaten to default on its debt. We should get rid of this debt ceiling altogether. When we pass a bill saying that we're going to do a certain thing, that is our saying, and we're going to pay for it. That's what the United States government does. So I think that Donald Trump and I, hey, listen, I'm ready to join up with him and make that happen. We need to get rid of the debt ceiling altogether, not extend it, not say, ooh, while this is going on, this budget negotiation, let's just roll out a few $1 trillion more in the debt ceiling. Nope. That has gotten us into trouble before. It continues to get us into trouble. Donald Trump is right. Let's get rid of it altogether.
You can find our full conversation with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. We covered the waterfront online or on the terminal, of course. Pretty remarkable moment to have the president posting while she was talking with us today on Bloomberg as we reassemble our political panel for their take on this. Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, is with us, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, president CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. So is this something we all agree on here, or at least you two? Yes, Elizabeth Warren, eliminate the debt ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
is that music to the partnership as well?
Absolutely, because every year it's a fight, and it's a ridiculous fight.
We have
other more important things to do.
It's being used as like a political football here, and it just is. It's code to cut Medicare and Medicaid and other entitlement programs. So why do we have it? It just creates a false crisis.
Right.
Well, but what conservatives fiscally will tell you is that no, this actually creates incentive to try to exercise some fiscal responsibility, Sarah. I mean, even if there was a real effort to do this, would it ever be able to get through this House of Representatives when the conservatives are so loud?
I think you can. Okay, so removing it does not mean, okay, go spend anything you want. We still have to control that, and we need to probably do a little bit better job at controlling that. But the reality is, this is a dumb fight. We have it all the time. We always know it's going to pass, but you know, it's just a blood sport here that can just be eliminated from both sides. It doesn't matter if when Biden was the president and now with Trump as president, it's always a lift to get it done. And there's so many other things they should be focusing on. Just remove this. You
tend to wonder if this reconciliation effort slows down to the point where the debt limit needs to be addressed separately, if this could actually be something, God forbid, Democrats and Republicans work on together and agree on.
I'm not sure that we are there yet,
Crazy
but
talk?
I mean, if you have Donald Trump and Elizabeth Warren agreeing on something, that's pretty remarkable in my opinion. But
Right.
you never know. Stranger things have happened. Washington is an unpredictable place, but I'm not sure that we are there at this moment to have a partisan view on this.
But if we do get to the point where it's looking like doing something before the August recess to raise the debt ceiling, which the Treasury Secretary has warned is basically the deadline is not looking realistic, how would Democrats use that moment? What would they use that leverage to try to get from Republicans? Because they haven't had much leverage to work with for the last 6 months.
I'm still not sure they have leverage, right? They have no majorities. They have no other fight here. I think that the best thing that they have is be putting these members, the Republican frontline members, in a position to take tough votes on cutting things like Medicare and Medicaid, like we're seeing them having to do now. That is the leverage that Democrats have, and it's leverage to move into the midterms and then to the presidential in 28. So I'm not sure that they'd be able to use it for the debt ceiling.
How much communication is there as we wait for this meeting to conclude at the White House between Mike Johnson and John Thune? Mike Johnson is clearly concerned that anything is going to be changed down to a point of punctuation. John Thune's got a room full of people who want to make changes, but they are talking to try to keep this from going off the rails, right? What are these conversations like?
They have been talking regularly for the last year. They talk all the time. They've been trying to coordinate on this. Senator Thune understands the problem that the Speaker Johnson has, and Speaker Johnson understands the lift that Thune is going to have to get the House bill, something close to the House bill through the Senate. So they talk all the time, much more so than the Speaker talked with Mitch McConnell.
Well, and they both deploy a similar strategy, which is get the president to weigh in, too, which is why Thune has brought several Republicans to the White House to talk directly with Trump. But does the president have the same influence over the Republican conference in the Senate as he seems to in the House, Sarah?
It's close, but not quite the same. I mean, the House members are up every 2 years. Senators are up every 6 years. They get a little bit more breathing room. But the senators, he's very close to a lot of the senators. And Trump got a lot of them elected. I mean, look at, we got control just in the last election cycle, and they came through with Donald Trump's coattails.
A lot of things could change here when it comes to SALT, when it comes to the extent of cuts. Of course, Democrats are watching this from the sidelines. When it comes to things like Medicaid, for instance, and maybe even talking about fraud, waste, and abuse with Medicare, we're now hearing. What's the job in the meantime? Just keep making commercials?
Keep making commercials and keep letting the American people know. There's been polling out that say independents overwhelmingly, I think it's like 65 or higher % of independents and these swing voters do not like this bill as is. So I think that the Democrats are doing a really good job on the messaging front. They are winning the messaging front on this right now. And I think putting Republicans, especially Republicans in the House, in a tough spot for their reelection. I mean, this is where Elon Musk comes into play. He can fund some of these primary challengers for these Republicans that are going to take tough votes. And if he's unhappy with the way they're voting, he can fund them. And so I think that's all in favor for Democrats. So they just need to keep pushing forward on their message and stay together, which is a new thing for Democrats.
Well, when we consider tough votes, obviously there's tough votes on the big things like this, but I also wonder about tough votes on the little things, or the smaller things, shall we say, like the rescissions package the White House sent yesterday. $9 billion in cuts, USAID, NPR, PBS primarily. Even if it can get through the House, do you see difficulty in the Senate, given that it also cuts back on things like PEPFAR, for example?
I think it would end up getting through the Senate. I think it would be a little different version, but I think the Senate would pass it as well. We are looking to cut the bills in this country. PBS maybe won't be cut as much. I mean, the discussion last night is like, do we really want to cut Big Bird? So that could be a problem. But a lot of them, we are looking to make cuts and to lower the deficit. So I think you'll see it pass both chambers. And the best thing the Republicans have going for us is the Democrats really don't have a leader. You run commercials, but there's really no strategy, and there's no leader yet. And that really helps the men and women, because our men and women of Main Street are the ones that are on the front lines. And some of the commercials are being run against them in their districts. But right now, the swing voters, at least in their districts, are saying, we're good. We still like Trump. We would vote for him again, and we're happy with you.
We appreciate the insights, as always, going into overtime with Sarah Chamberlain and Megan Hayes. A great panel with us this evening as we wait to find out what happened in this meeting at the White House. This is why you join Balance of Power every day. We're going to bring you there now, live from the White House, following his meeting with President Trump and other members of the Finance Committee. Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. Senator, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. What went on in that meeting, and what's the new number on SALT?
Well, we didn't do anything with SALT. I think, first of all, the president is just so very positive. He's talking about a $15 trillion investment in this country. He's talking about the 4.6% growth we've seen this quarter as well. And I think that what that does is it affects the future debt that this country has, the national debt. So we talked a lot about that, is how does this bill impact it? And we just heard some numbers that probably over 10 years' time, we're going to cut back some $8 trillion in our deficit because of this bill. That's a big number.
How do you get to $8 trillion when the Congressional Budget Office actually says that $2.4 trillion will be added to the deficit?
Yeah, the CBO was wrong with President Kennedy's tax cuts, with President Reagan's tax cuts, and Trump 45's tax cuts as well. But we get there by rolling back a regulation and by essentially growing the economy. And we think there's a lot of growth there. There's a lot of tariff money coming in as well that we're already seeing as well. So this is the Trump economy. We have confidence that we'll get at least 3% growth. I think the CBO is thinking 1.6%. So that's where it will happen, is by the growth in this economy.
Did the lawmakers in the room today talk about permanence when it came to business tax breaks, Senator? I know this has emerged as an important theme in the Senate. Research and development deduction, bonus depreciation, interest expensing. Make them permanent. It's going to cost more money. Can you get that done?
I sure hope so. And we did spend a lot of time in that conversation, and we've not settled on it yet. But there's certainly a lot of us in the room that want to get to permanence. We're weighing it back and forth as well, but that would be my goal.
Mm-hmm.
Senator, I want to go back to what you said a moment ago, which is that you didn't do anything on SALT. Do you mean that that is just not something that came up in this meeting, or that the Senate's intention is to decide that the $40,000 SALT cap remains in place?
Yeah, so in an hour and a half with the president, we talked about SALT for 2 minutes. I think we need to go back and reach back to Speaker Johnson and kind of figure out, is there any wiggle room there? But there's a lot of consternation for a red state person like myself that this is basically a $350 billion subsidy for blue states. So we're not done with it, but it was not the tip of this conversation. I think the discussion today was where the economy is, the great growth that we're seeing, that we're going to prevent the largest tax increase in American history.
What did the president have to say about Elon Musk when this came up, Senator? This is remarkable. He calls it disgusting. The bill's bankrupting America. Shame on those who voted for it. Is Donald Trump upset?
Yeah, I can't speak for the president on that particular conversation, but Elon was not important at all as far as this conversation goes.
Okay, fair enough. He's certainly worked his way into plenty of other conversations, though, here in Washington, Senator. And he is arguing that the bill needs to be killed. And I wonder about the chances of the bill actually meeting a death when it goes back to the House if too many changes are made. How aware are you and your colleagues on the Finance Committee, not just on the tax issues, but on Medicaid issues as well, knowing how badly some fiscal conservatives wanted those cuts that they fought for in the House? How much are you considering your wiggle room to really change these things?
Well, I think we wake up in the morning, we go to sleep thinking about how much wiggle room do we have. And certainly we're proud of what the House got accomplished, especially those last 48 hours. I think what I've been talking about is, can we get another $500 billion of spending cuts somewhere in this bill? That would be my goal, is a $500 billion in addition to what the House does. I think much more than that, and the House won't be able to swallow, but I think that we could move the needle just a little bit in that direction.
Questions about Medicaid and specifically provider tax changes. Right. Senator, did you get to this? I know that there are a number of senators who are concerned, who come from rural states, about the potential for nursing homes or rural hospitals to be closed. And did Medicare come up, an attempt to find waste, fraud, and abuse in the main program?
Let's talk about the provider tax, first of all. The discussions we've been having on the provider tax is we're not going to touch the nursing homes. We understand that maybe 40–50% of people in nursing homes are on Medicaid, so we're not going to do anything to hurt people in nursing home, people with disabilities. We certainly talk a lot about rural hospitals and how that they're struggling as well. So those are very much of top of mind, and we're not going to forget about those. The only really small conversation about Medicare may be around Medicare Advantage, the fraud, waste, and abuse going on there, that because of their upcoding, they cost American taxpayers some $275 billion more than if they'd just been on plain Medicare, so to speak. So there's a lot of concern on Capitol Hill about Medicare Advantage.
Senator, we spoke a moment ago about the Congressional Budget Office scoring of the tax bill that passed the House in particular. But was there conversation inside the White House today on the other CBO report we received about the $2.8 trillion that actually could be saved by the president's tariff policies? Did Donald Trump bring that up?
Well, certainly President Trump is very proud of his tariff policies and the income that's already coming in. I think that they released some numbers today. CBO maybe released some numbers that showed a much better outlook if you give us current policy, so to speak, as well. So, yes, President Trump very proud of the tariff money that's coming in and think that there's more to come from that direction.
Is the parliamentarian going to be all right with this current policy baseline? We spoke earlier with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who launched an inquiry into this, calling it magic math. Do you know for a fact, Senator, that it'll survive the bird bath?
You know, I think it will. The parliamentarian is certainly their own beast up here. I'm a simple country doctor. Sometimes it's hard for me to predict what the parliamentarian will or won't do, but certainly there's others that do. And I have confidence in John Thune, our Senate Majority Leader, and others who are really good working with the parliamentarian. I have every reason to believe that we're going to be okay in that realm.
Senator, while we have you here on Bloomberg TV and radio, I'm also wondering about conversations you may have had with Senator Thune around your Credit Card Competition Act potentially being attached as an amendment to the Genius Act, which could get a vote any day now. Your colleague, Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, was on Bloomberg TV yesterday about that prospect. This is what she told us, and we'll have you respond.
One of the things that I'm looking for is whether the Durbin-Marshall bill, it will be attempted to attach to the stablecoin bill. It's not about stablecoins, it's about credit card swipe fees, and that would be a heavy lift to take a bill that already has been carefully negotiated and add a new subject that is that controversial.
Is that your intention here, Senator, or could the majority leader talk you out of that?
Oh, I sure think that we want to vote on this bill. Look, this bill is going to give inflation relief to hundreds of millions of Americans. This is the one bill that would actually decrease in inflation, that this bill would save probably 2 or 3% every time you use your credit card. Look, Americans are being charged 7 times more than what folks are in the European Union to use that credit card fee. So as we're facing kind of some issues around the tariffs and supplies coming into this country, that this credit card bill would help slow down that inflation, and I think it'll be good for everyone on Main Street. It would be good for hardworking Americans as well. Look, the crypto bill is really good for wealthy people, but people back home don't care much about this crypto bill as opposed to really caring about our credit card bill. I think the credit card bill is the double win for the president.
So do you see the crypto bill, though, as the best vehicle for getting your credit card bill passed, sir?
Oh, without any doubt that it's a banking bill. This is a bill that fits with that as well. This was assigned to the banking committee. What I really like about the connection here is that this will open up the opportunity for stablecoin to go onto credit cards as well and open that up. So I think that's the win-win here if there was ever going to be a win.
It's great to have you with us, Senator. Moments after the meeting concludes at the White House, Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, live on Bloomberg TV and radio. A fascinating conversation as we learn more about the progress here. And we want to make sure you're aware House Speaker Mike Johnson will be on Bloomberg TV and radio tomorrow morning. Bloomberg Surveillance, that's 7:30 a.m. Eastern, as the Senate considers its own revisions to this massive tax bill that narrowly passed in the House.
And then tomorrow on this late edition of Balance of Power, we'll be hearing from Republican Senators Tim Scott of South Carolina, the chair of the Banking Committee, as well as Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. That's tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.